Good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. My name is Amalia Payares, and I'm Director of Latin American and Latino Studies. And I want to welcome you to this event, which is part of our 2-week-long 40th anniversary celebration, 40th anniversary of our program, which was started thanks to the efforts of student Mexican and Puerto Rican activists in 1973 who were striving to make sure that the university responded to students and that they gave access to students and that they created a curriculum that was relevant to their needs and to their lives. So as a product of that, we have the Latin American and Latino Studies program, but we also have here members of the Asian American Studies program who also are the product of student engagement and student activism. And this is a story that we know has happened throughout the country with African American, Asian American, Latino youth activist students engaged in creating educational opportunities for themselves and those who follow them. So with that being said, it's very appropriate that today we would see this film, Storming the Gates, which is precisely about educational access and what else we can do to keep moving it forward. And the theme of tonight is bridging communities on campus in Chicago and beyond to think about not only the struggles of different groups, but also how we can all work together, different communities, to make some of these goals happen. And so we're going to have a good discussion afterwards, after the film, to engage in that conversation.
Okay. Thank you so much, Amalia. So my name is Mario Lucero. I'm the assistant director here, and it's an honor to have to host one of LALS's events for the 40th anniversary celebration. So, like Amalia was saying, Storming the Gates, this documentary is really powerful because it kind of talks about the past victories and those gains that have happened due to the activism of students on campus in the whole entire state of Illinois, right? For fighting for access to higher education. So it is a very short documentary, which is great because it leaves us with more time to kind of ask those questions to our two special panelists that are here today to talk on the issues.
Thank you, Leonard, and hello, everyone. Hope you enjoyed the film. It was, for us, a labor of love. It took about, I'm going to move away from this light. It took over a year to really develop that piece. We were challenged because of the fact that many of the leaders within the state of Illinois had left various colleges and universities, and many of them have retired, and some of them, before we could get around to actually interview them, had died. And so one of our challenges, of course, was to make sure that we were able to document the history so that you and future generations would understand, how these institutions were accessed. As was mentioned throughout the film, it was a collaborative effort between two major organizations, the Illinois Committee for Black Concerns of Higher Education, of which I was a member for many years, and the Illinois Latino Council for Higher Education, ILACHI. And so we were the first two organizations within the state to be awarded a grant by the Illinois Board of Higher Education to do this work. And so, there was a feeling throughout the state that there needed to be a way to document the history of these institutions. We felt that it was time. There was a lot of things going on within the context of the tax on affirmative action that was mentioned. We looked in California. There was the Balky case. We saw, the Proposition 209. We saw what was going on in Texas, and that's what was mentioned by Attorney Driver, what was going on in Michigan. And we saw erosions here on this campus, actually. I've been involved here at the University of Illinois for many years. I graduated from here in '73 and started my career in support programs, which was educational system program and others that served as national models. And we started seeing, that in times of strife and limited resources, that these programs were being targeted to change and so forth. So we wanted to make sure that even though we weren't here, that you, our future leaders, would be able to take up the mantle and baton and be armed with information. Our mantra was institutionalization. It was important that we wanted these programs to remain, whether we were here or not, whether you're here or not, that everyone truly understood how they originated. One thing that stands out throughout is this whole notion of African American and Latino collaboration and coalition. We started actually working on this project back in the 90s, as Leonard mentioned, because we started looking at the numbers of African American Latinos on college campuses, and we started seeing those numbers grow. We started looking at the numbers of faculty and staff. If you really closely look at the research, you'll know it should happen when there's an influx and increase of African American Latino students on campus. Typically there's an increase of Latino and African American faculty and staff, but oftentimes that does not happen. And so, it was important for us to really, as one of the outcomes of the project, it was to develop a professional development plan, because oftentimes that was cited as one reason why, faculty could not be recruited or they could not be retained. So that was part of the grant. The second thing was that, we wanted to expose our students to, research opportunities. And so the grant allowed us to develop a research forum for students. In fact, we've held it here on this campus for the last 6 years, and we're planning one for this coming year. I think it's April 15th. And so all of you are encouraged to participate. So the idea is to promote equity and access for undergraduate, graduate, and professional African American Latino students, faculty, and staff. So we're very excited. When you looked at the film, there was some recurring themes throughout. One thing that really stood out was Clarence Shelley's statement, who indicated that from his perspective, and he's an administrator that's been down in Urbana forever, it seems, since '68, he's still there. But he says that when he worked with students in the 60s, African American and Latino students, they demanded everything and expected nothing. And he contrasts that with students of the day who basically expect everything and demand nothing. There were some other things that really came out also in interviews, people like Jim Anderson, who was a student. He's a very distinguished professor of educational policy down in Urbana. He was one of the people that was interviewed. He was a student back in Urbana in the 60s, and he talked about the ebb and flow of history, how we can't really count on what's here today being here in the future. Again, he's talked about the African American Cultural Center. It's the same thing for the Latin American Cultural Centers. We have facilities today that may not be around if there become an option between supporting things financially. Some things will be cut. Sandra Driver, Attorney Driver talked about the notion of being able to really fight and advocate for those things. It's important that we all understand our roles in that. I know that you have a lot of questions, but to me, again, the film was a labor of love. There were two people, legislators, that were interviewed in the film that I would like to point out that really had a significant amount of responsibility and work in terms of holding universities accountable. Senator Dick Newhouse and Senator Miguel de Valle. They work very, very hard to hold universities accountable, and so some of the programs that are on this campus today and others were a result of their advocacy and so forth. So it always requires internal advocacy as well as external advocacy. What can we do? We think that the important thing is to look at models of success. One thing that Senator de Valle says that it doesn't happen often, but whenever African Americans and Latinos could form coalitions and that we could work together, because many of our problems are very similar socioeconomically and educationally. Whenever we work together, which is not often, but whenever we can experience tremendous success. We've seen that. And so our challenge is to foster coalitions, to encourage everyone to really see things that we have in common, and when we do, and when we're challenged in terms of retrenchment on some of these issues and so forth, that we begin to work together to demand that we retain those gains.
Hi everyone. I really appreciate the invitation to be here, and the overall goal of trying to open up dialogues between communities to see what are our shared histories. You know, seeing some of what was in the film and seeing Northwestern on screen a lot made me think about the fact that at Northwestern they have an Asian American Studies program due to a student hunger strike. And that Asian American Studies program in the Chicago area is the longest standing Asian American Studies program over 10 years now. And I don't know how many of you are aware of the history right here on our own campus at UIC, that it took, you know, about 19 years or more students, you know, rallying and really lobbying for not just Asian American Studies, but academic support for Asian American students, as well as the Asian American Resource and Cultural Center. The point that's made in the film that these things did not come about just from the status quo educational system, that it really came about due to students and faculty and staff and community members fighting to get these kinds of resources in place. That's, you know, still true today, and I think that's why it's really important to have this opportunity for us to talk across communities, because just as in the 90s, even today, right, these resources are eroding, and we need to work together to ensure that we can continue making sure educational access, inclusiveness, and equity are achieved. So I'm not sure how much more I should say, since we're going to have a Q&A, but the Anna Peasy initiative that Mario mentioned, I just wanted to say it stands for the Asian American and Native American Pacific Islander Serving Institutions Initiative. And I direct this initiative here at UIC, and it provides specific curriculum in Asian American Studies through funding that provides more faculty. Our Asian American Studies program has very few faculty. It is out of 3 people, tenure track faculty, less than 2 FTE. FTE means full-time equivalent. So it's very difficult to offer the minor that we have without the added grant funding that we have. And I think it's really important to have that curriculum. As the film said, it provides a history that teaches students their own histories that haven't been included, you know, in schools. Many of us do not learn anything about Asian Americans in the US. And there are very key common and shared histories, right? Spanish colonialism. Filipinos were here in the US in Louisiana from the 1500s on. Why is that? Do you learn that in your curriculum? Isn't that important to learn? Besides just a sense of, oh, there is a history, it fills in the history for us where we have so many gaps. Just one other example I'll throw out there, because I think students in Asian American Studies classes will often begin questioning, oh, why haven't I learned this? And that's really key, right? Part of all of what we're doing is to question the status quo, question how our institutions are set up, and to take that power for ourselves and change it and make sure we have you know, more inclusive curriculum. So the other example I wanted to throw out is we watch a film in Asian American history classes, and you know, how many of us think about where the tea came from for the Boston Tea Party? Where did the tea come from? China. And why would that be important? You know, we need to see the connections. For Lewis and Clark expedition, you know, one of the things that Thomas Jefferson was looking for was a trade route to China. So, I mean, these are just very, very few examples that show you how key it is to have that curriculum. But the other things that we do on the grant is to provide specific academic support for Asian American and Pacific Islander students and all UIC students and English language learner students. And so it's important to keep in mind that Asian Americans, just as many other groups, I'm thinking of women, you know, they were not allowed to apply to med school. Women weren't allowed in medical school here in the US. We can think of other communities, students with disabilities. Do they have full access? Some of the legislative acts are very recent. LGBT communities. The film points out how important campus climate is for making sure that all students feel you know, supported, included, really at a place where they can develop to their full potential. That is part of educational success. And so something like Illinois Safe Schools Alliance that looks at how K through 12 schools really support LGBT students. I mean, those are examples that I'm thinking of that are important for us, right? So here at UIC, in terms of Asian American students and English language learner students, all of these academic support services as well as programs at the Cultural Center are important. And I think that kind of holistic approach to education is something that I see as a common goal, you know, across communities, and a recognition that that's really important, and it's part of achieving equity, and just providing kind of the same books and teachers, which, you know, that doesn't even happen. So, but there is an idea that if you treat all students the same, that you achieve equality, and I don't think that's true. I think we need to look at how very targeted services are designed to support different needs of different students, and that ultimately that helps us achieve equity.
Thank you so much for organizing this event. The movie was incredible. I just had sort of more of an orienting question for both of you. I was wondering if you could give us a quick history of the events that happened between sort of like the 80s, which seems like around the 80s and early 90s is when sort of like the film, not exactly cut off, but you know what I mean? So like the events that happened in recent times up to now that the movie didn't cover related to these issues. You could just, describe those. Just
Actually,
curious.
something that I mentioned, and I think Karen alluded to as well, is the need for a curriculum. That was one of the goals of the grant that we received, was to develop a curriculum. There's a lot that's been happening. Just most recently, the past election, for example, one thing that Seymour Bryson talks about in the film is extremely important to emphasize is the political nature of education. Everything that goes on politically have an adverse impact or some impact directly or indirectly in education, whether it's funding or whether there's cases that are brought before the court challenging certain ideas. For example, now we're looking carefully to see, what are the implications for the Supreme Court in terms of its next ruling on affirmative action. So we're looking at that very carefully. If you think about the Barkey case in the 70s, the 80s, the Hopkins case, the 90s, and then the Michigan case, all those things really were a bellwether, a reflection of what was going on generally in society and politically in terms of, what was the thinking in terms of access and equity for underrepresented groups. So historically, every gang as I see it, has been connected with what was going on in society, starting in the 60s. And I think that was one of the major things that we tried to achieve in the film, was to show the connectedness between what goes on in the community and what happens within educational institutions. And so we looked at it nationally, but we also looked at it within the state of Illinois, which has a very unique history. And so, Illinois, everything really was focusing early on in terms of the riots of 1968, in terms of the death, after the death of Martin Luther King. We started seeing, people feeling empowered after the riots. And then a lot of the students who had never been to campus before became students. We started demanding that, I think, as it was mentioned there, that African American and Latino student enrollment increased. We started seeing the proliferation of African American, Latin American study programs. And I think right now the fight is not just to maintain those programs, but also to expand them. Here at UIC, we're about to become a Hispanic serving institution. What does that mean in terms of implications for staff and faculty? As I mentioned before, when you really look at the data, in many institutions there's a correlation between student enrollment, staff, and faculty enrollment, supposed to be. And so, it has implications in terms of, what's the next move, after that, what comes after that, and who's going to lead that charge. And so there's a lot of implications in terms of what's going on now and how it's connected to what has happened in the past.
I think that, if I could just add, that one of the challenges that's happened since this film was created is that there's just been many more. It was a response to the rise of Reaganism and the conservative right, and that's just increased and intensified. And so we've had some challenges that Michael and I sometimes talk about that we didn't think we'd ever have. We didn't think about it, at least not at the forefront of our head. And that is that the university has hired people that look like us to speak their agenda. So this is now a very common thing that we didn't deal with in the past, that people that, are Latino, African American, Asian, etc., that have a more conservative bent and basically speak the university's language and now become a barrier to continue to move the agenda forward. Karen, do you have other insights on this question?
I guess, going back to the question, one of the things I'm thinking about is just, what students are facing now in terms of being able to fund their education. And that kind of, lack of resources is affecting all of us. And in terms of being connected to the backlash against affirmative action, it's made it much harder for many of us in higher ed to support students in the way that we want to, because we have to kind of go around these specific supports or policies based on social identities. I think it's important, coming back to what Leonard was just saying, to look at how to, not to just be limited to our social identities in how we're setting up these kinds of avenues of access, but to really keep in mind, what's just for all students. But that doesn't mean in a way that ignores the kinds of support that affirmative action programs we're really aiming for. It's not just access like admissions, but it's also when you get to campus, all of these programs and resources that we have are part of affirmative action. It's part of making sure students can succeed in the educational institution that they get to. So when there is a backlash against affirmative action, it's really hurt our ability to maintain those kinds of programs and to justify the need for those kinds of programs. And I have seen that hurting students a lot.
Other questions?
Yeah, just to follow up, Karen, maybe you can talk a little bit about 6 or 7 years ago there was a concern on campus that they want to collapse all the cultural centers into one multicultural center. I think that's a very good idea, that this was very recent, right?
Right.
So this idea of is not so much expanding, it's even maintaining what we have, right? So
Right. Yeah, I think that was a little bit before you arrived as the director. And, that was due to the fear of budget cuts, right? All of the cultural centers were reviewed, and one of the things that we kept hearing and that made us very fearful that the goal of UIC was to collapse all of the centers into one, is that they were looking for economies of scale. How can we still provide what we can provide to students, but with less dollars, with fewer staff? And I think what was really frustrating about it is that, similar to today, in order to truly serve the students in the way that we want to, we need more resources, we need more staff. And it's hard to run everything on a shoestring. And the NPZ initiative also is a great example of that. We cannot run the Asian American Studies program in any basic way without half of the funding from the grant. The Cultural Center, right at that time of the review, our associate director left for a different opportunity, but the way that our budget had eroded made it very difficult for us to be able to hire another associate director. So we turned to the grant. We wrote it into the grant, and we're lucky enough to get the grant in order to hire staff that should be maintained by UIC. And I think having a grant like the NPZ grant, which is a very new designation that's part of the U.S. Department of Education. Other minority serving designations you may be more familiar with: Hispanic serving institution, historically Black colleges and universities, HBCUs, tribal colleges. NPZ is part of that program, but I think it reflects a basic problem with how we fund our educational system. Is we have to prove that there's a need and a gap that the institution's not meeting in order to get this federal money to fix that. And so I just feel like that keeps us in this cycle of, all right, we have some basic educational needs that should be funded by the federal government, period. If all of that money that we have to apply for and jump through hoops for were actually provided to our schools and universities, maybe we'd actually be, in a better place.
We used to call that soft money, right? And then as soon as the soft money goes, half your program goes.
Right,
So
kind of gonna erode, right?
I'm from a community that is considered white, and we are, that doesn't allow me, I'm a minority obviously here too, and we don't consider ourselves as white, at least I don't. And I'm thinking about opportunities that would come up within the education system that kind of excludes me for applying for like grants and different opportunities. And I'm thinking about these communities of struggles. Where would you locate people like me in that?
okay, so what happened was when we opened the doors, kicked the doors for Blacks and Latinos to come in, and it opened the doors for a large number of people who would not have gotten in either. Higher education was primarily for upper middle class folk. So it expanded the opportunities for a lot of people. So that said, how would you respond to her comment?
I think one of the things that comes to mind is just, how many groups have to fight for their own right to define themselves. And obviously, the federal census categories, and then the way that many of our universities are required to report on student numbers and use these same categories in order to understand who's on campus, they're insufficient. So I do like the point about, never being satisfied with the way things are and trying to figure out how to change that. I do know there have been discussions on our campus about disaggregating student data and revising the different categories by which we currently, record who's here. And one of the discussions that has come up is that, the category of white is not sufficient, and also for Arab American, Muslim students, they do not appear anywhere because the only category right now that's available is white. And many other schools have gone ahead to revise, student data. There was a school recently here that also began to look at LGBT students. So it's not something that UIC can't do. And I think UIC needs to hear from students, staff, and faculty in terms of how you would like to see that changed and what would be a better way to do it. But I still come back to this message that all of us here have benefited from past, people who have decided to do something. And so we have to continue doing that and figure out how to,
And I would just add that when you look at it historically, probably one of the major groups to benefit from affirmative type initiatives were white women, because of the fact that they were excluded, as I mentioned, in the academy. And if you look at their numbers now, you'll see that they are significantly enrolled at most colleges, universities, and that's a good thing. But there is a group that is really not represented at all, and that's low-income students. And because, as was mentioned, one of the major criteria for admission to the campus is CT scores and SAT scores, and research shows that there's a high correlation between ACT scores and income, and ACT and SAT scores and income. One thing that Karen mentioned when they were talking about consolidating all the cultural centers and so forth, one of the rationales then was that there was a limited amount of money, that the appropriations that had come to the campus for many years has been held up. And so to increase efficiencies, you consolidate these units and so forth. And so that's going to continue to come up with an issue.
But I think going back to that moment, what was really important was the communities came together. Each and every cultural center brought all the students, staff, and faculty out. There were town halls at every single center. And the overwhelming message that the university administration heard was, you cannot consolidate us. We won't allow that. And I think it's very difficult to keep that momentum up. I mean, I understand that for many of us, it's so difficult to be doing what we're doing every day. It's hard to keep networks strong, like the NDRU is the Network of Diversity Relay Units. And for those of you who may not have heard of it, it was something that was completely volunteer. Staff, faculty, students came together because we knew that we had to share information across campus. Many of us didn't know what was happening to other units. But then when we found out, could see, similar things are happening across campus. If we don't know that that's happening, we cannot work together to stave them off in the way that when the cultural centers were being threatened, people came together. And I think that is the challenge. How do you maintain that when many of our communities are so embattled already that you need like some reserves to be able to build these networks and coalitions that we need. So I don't want to end on such a pessimistic note, but so I hope that that inspires us to say, we can't stop trying to build those coalitions. One very specific example, we have talked about HSI at UIC and Annapese, and we have to coordinate our communities across these efforts, because in terms of the U.S. Department of Education's policy, the Annapese grant that we want to apply for cannot be held concurrently with an HSI grant. So that's a great example of two communities are being pitted against each other. And so,
Divide and conquer.
yes, so we need to work together and coordinate and let UIC know how, and the Department of Education know, how that is just a way to hurt our communities and doesn't help us make sure that we are serving two very important immigrant communities. And, you know, I don't have an answer for that, except we need to continue doing this and coordinate,
And let me just add also, in terms of the African American community, one of the major challenges for us, that is a community of color, is not to be pitted against each other in reference to African American student enrollment. It's the lowest it's ever been in the history of the campus, and some people think it's an either-or proposition, and it's not. There's really enough space here for everyone. And so sometimes people think that because the Latino enrollment is going up, that has an adverse impact on African American enrollment. It's not. It's not at all. So we have to be very careful not to be steered into a confrontational mode in that regard. And the way to do that is by having forums like this here, and to talk about it, and to develop, programs that will foster intercultural relationships and understanding.
Are there some specific steps that we can know about as far as staying involved and becoming active? And who do we go to? How do we get information so that we can disseminate it within our own organizations or within our own programs?
One of the things I recommend is, like, of course, electronically. We have a couple of listservs that I think we could try to make, useful for this particular thing. And I think it's connected to this whole idea of what our next steps are for just a common agenda or a common discussion. I think that there's a role for NDRU to continue to exist. And I think that students can actually help energize this, because we didn't have as much collaboration of students as we would have liked. But if we would have had, I think right now we need to sap your energy and get it back working again, because otherwise we're going to be divided and conquered around this. It's going to be, by the way, the university is going to be making its own grant to try to get Hispanic serving monies to do what they want to do, which has nothing to do with the actual Latino initiatives on the campus. So we're going to have to be battling the universities so they don't undercut us and take our money and then because this has already happened already. All right, so I think we need to actually come together. So maybe as a next step, we can think about how we can have a meeting with the NDRU and how we can communicate with student organizations so they can be part of that discussion. I don't have an answer right now, but I think I'm going to depend on Mario and the people from the Cultural Center to connect the people who are here today with it, and maybe when we come up with a good plan for how to meet again, we can make sure everybody knows about that.